So now that we have a basic pickup script executing successfully and we have our game object being picked up by our player, there's one thing I want to point out before we move on to add even more functionality to this, and that is that when I select this cube game object and I look at the different components, there's a public variable here called points, and currently points are set to 0, and this public variable allows me to, with each individual game object, assign a number of points to its value. So I'll just set this to 10 points. And what that means is that when I pick up this cube, I've earned 10 points. And I could introduce another cube. I'll just create another cube. And I'll move that somewhere back in space, and I'll move it up a little bit, and I'll do the same thing to it. I'll drag and drop the pickup script onto it. So I have two cubes. In fact, I'll rename this cube 2. On the second cube, I could assign 10 more points, or I could assign this 15 points, and so the first cube is worth less than the second cube. And if I go in and select cube 2 and make sure that isTrigger is turned on in the collider component, I now should be able to go through and I'll pick up the first cube, and that cube should destroy. And I'll make a mental note that I should have earned 10 points, and when I hit the second cube, I should have earned 15 points. I've just picked up 2 game objects. Now, again, at this point, I have no way of tracking how many points I have or how many objects I have picked up. So I want to start to do that. And I'll be able to do that with this GUI component, or this GUI menu that I've downloaded. Now, I'm going to take a look outside of Unity. I'm just going to double click on this folder and show you what is exactly inside this folder. First off, there is a Photoshop document that has the different states of all of these different graphics. And this is just a progressive list of graphics. There is collect 0, 0, which means that this is the 0 state. And when I pick up one object, it's going to look like this. When I pick up a second object, the heads-up display is going to look like this. And when I pick up all 3, it'll look like this. Now, I've thrown in a fourth as an example, but really this is just a template to test the functionality of this. And there's no continuity with my game. There's no theme. So I'm going to go back and make sure that I update this. But the basic concept is these 4 items are the important stuff. If I open up the Photoshop document, you can see that this is just I've included this just as something to be able to quickly replicate this. So it's basically just a layer of red content over top a layer of gray content, just to demonstrate how that was made. I quickly modified that and saved each one of these PNG documents out. And I want to point out that if you open up one of these PNGs, the background is transparent. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Unity. I'm going to reveal the GUI hierarchy. Now, the first item that shows up in this list is collect. That's the Photoshop document. So I'm going to go to collect 0. This is the 0 state, or the default state of this heads-up display. And the way that I can activate this is with collect 0 selected. I want to establish a heads-up display component, and I can do that by going to Game Object, Other, and I'm going to create a GUI texture. And when I do that, I get this object inside the hierarchy that adopts the name of the graphic that I've selected, and it also places the graphic on my screen. Now, if I hit the play button, right now I'm running around and I got this heads-up display right in the middle. It looks more like kind of like a crosshair or something rather than a heads-up display. So that's kind of an inappropriate position for it. And in fact, I'm actually going to rename this. I'll call this collect, not 0, 1, but I'll call it collect HUD. So it's the heads-up display for the collection. And again, I chose 3 objects as kind of an arbitrary solution to demonstrate the concept here. You might have a series of different menus. You might have to collect 3 of these things. You might have to collect 3, coins, 3 different tools, 3, magic objects, or, you could have several of these heads-up displays working in your favor. You could certainly have a health and a points, and we'll get to that eventually. But I want to select the collect HUD object that I just created, and I want to look at the inspector components here. And I have the texture listed here. I have a background color which is not being used, and I have the pixel inset. And I'm just going to reveal that, and I can adjust the pixel inset, and I'll just kind of drag this way off to the left. I'm going to push the X value over. I'm going to push the Y value up. So I'm going to set that in the top left-hand corner. And this is the thing that I'm going to apply a script to receive some functionality. Okay, so for a moment I'm going to forget about the GUI texture, and I'm going to draw your attention to this object collect script. Now before I apply it, and all I'm going to do is drag and drop this object onto the collect HUD. Well, in fact, I can do that now. It doesn't really matter. I'll just apply it. And just note that object collect script has now been applied to the collection HUD. I'm going to double click on this script and we'll take a really quick look at this. Now, there's a little bit more going on in this script than some of the previous scripts. There are some public variables here that we'll take a look at actually inside Unity. There's some start functionality. There's a fire function here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But basically what this thing does is that it tests to see if a value is being set. And there's this collect value. And if it's 1, it's going to update the graphic texture to this collect 1 texture. If this collect is equal to 2 or 3, it's going to update it to the different graphic textures. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to do in order to ensure that this is set up to work properly. So I'm just going to close this script. Now remember, all I've done at this point is I've set up the heads-up display by selecting the collect 0 graphic, going to the game object, create other, and creating a GUI texture. I rename that GUI texture collect HUD. I repositioned the graphic, and I dragged the object collect script to the collection heads-up display. If I click the collect heads-up display, I can see that there's an object collect script that's been attached to it, and there are some public variables here. There's a collect 0 texture, a collect 1, 2, and 3, and that corresponds with these graphics that I created. So I'm just going to drag and drop collect 0 and attach it to the collect 0 text. I'm going to take 1 and attach it to 1, 2 and to 2, and drag and drop 3 into 3. Now, that might have seemed kind of like a redundant step, and you might be scratching your head. I could have hard-coded that into my script, but the nice thing about this is that I can recreate these graphic elements and just reattach them to the script this way. And so now, if we go back to our pickup script, way back when we looked at this pickup script, and I'll just double-click this and open this up, in here, it basically looks for an object collect script, which we've just attached to our heads-up display, and it takes this variable of collect and does a ++, which is shorthand for add 1 to whatever the current total is. And by default, our collection heads-up display, we've collected 0 objects, and therefore we're looking at a heads-up display that reflects 0 objects. And if we run this, I'll just hit play. Because that pickup script has been programmed to send information to an object collect script, the first time that we collect an object, if you look in the top left-hand corner of my heads-up display, it's updating my heads-up display as I run into objects. So anything with this pickup script could potentially update that, or at least with this current pickup script, will update our heads-up display. So that's the basic functionality there. It's very procedural. There were some certain steps that I need to follow in order to execute this properly. Again, I'm going to stress the point that right now, in my opinion, my heads-up display makes absolutely no sense. There's no continuity from an aesthetic standpoint about what my heads-up display looks versus the things that I'm selecting. So right now, I don't really like the fact that I'm picking up cubes, and I don't like the fact that it's displaying these little red dots in my heads-up display. But I'm going to fix all that during a design phase of this project. Right now, I just want to get the functionality to work. So experiment with this process, get your heads-up display working, and we'll push this concept a little bit further in the next presentation.